I think the move from charity to philanthropy does happen in your heart, right? And that is, you know, and I know I keep beating up on those puppies, but, you know, it's puppies, right? You start with puppies, always. And for me, the metrosection phase was about unassailably innocent people who hadn't done anything wrong and then terrible circumstances had happened to them, right? So I think of it as big-eyed puppies. And we all start with big-eyed puppies, and it should start with big-eyed puppies. That's right. It's natural. You should be moved in your heart and feel a pull, right? But it can't just then end with the pull, right? Your brain has to step in at some point and say, well, yes, that's all well and good, but you know, what can I do that's effective? What can I, if I really want to make a difference? So you need to have a little discipline around your heart, you know, and you need to kind of quiet it. And then, you know, say that maybe, you know, this big-eyed puppy will interfere with a greater good, which is my plan, a bigger plan, and my theory of change and so forth. And so that is an inner journey. That is you kind of taking yourself to task and being a little harder on yourself. But then there's this third part, and I think of it as the move from sympathy to empathy, right? So at some point, you're looking upon the people or the environment or whatever it is, but in my case, it's mostly people. And they're suffering, and it's horrible, and you just want to end the suffering. I mean, you just want to find a way to end the suffering, and that's really, really important. But if it takes the form of not having listened and not having had the humility to hear and understand fully their situation, you are going to make mistakes. And that's the story of almost all international development projects in the 1970s and 80s. And you know, go back and read a book about international development that was written in the 80s, and you'll hear it in there. It's all of this kind of high-level thinking happening in the stratosphere, in offices in the UN, in New York, and whatever, you know, and they have no frame of reference inside the communities they want to affect. You know, and honestly, the story of the decay and the absolute horrible situation in Somalia is honestly a little bit the story of this. Because if you really look at the way the government of Somalia decayed and died, it was partly because of the way the international community came and did so much of the work of governance that there stopped being a government. And of course it collapsed into anarchy, and it still lives in anarchy today. And the international community has never really held its own feet to the fire and answered for that. So sympathy is looking upon an object and feeling something for the object. Empathy is entirely different, right? Empathy is, I'm looking upon another human who is as human as I am and feels everything I feel. And when their children die, they are just as upset and crushed and destroyed as you and I would be. And so when we read numbers about maternal mortality and infant mortality, they feel a little different when we're operating from empathy and not sympathy. And empathy's harder, right? Empathy is like, this is my open wound and I'm just pour salt all over it every single day, right? But it means that you're listening, right? You're respecting the full humanity of people. You are engaging with the idea that it's distinctly possible that these people are just as smart as I am, you know, and have already been thinking about the clean water situation, and maybe have some ideas about where to put the well that might be better and more grounded in reality than mine. And so there is a very big difference, even though it's such a tiny little shift from sympathy to empathy. But I think of that as a maturation process that absolutely has to occur, and it hasn't in so much of the world of what we do. Because, look, money is tight, and there's a race, a competition for it, right, between the UNICEFs and the CARES and the Oxfams or whatever. And so the marketing is basically all about big-eyed puppies. And it plays into this hierarchy of suffering, right? We have manufactured a hierarchy where you know, a baby with cancer is more important than a baby with AIDS, and a baby with AIDS is better than a grown-up with AIDS who did something to get it. And then a grown-up with AIDS is better than maybe somebody who is in jail with AIDS, and so on and so on. And so there's this kind of like ladder of attractiveness of the object of your philanthropy.
And do you think that's reasonable, Abby, to have a hierarchy?
I think it's normal. I think it's understandable. And I don't think it's helping us at all, because then you see money stampeding to these places, and then you see absolute suffocation to those places. So this thoughtfulness, what I'm talking about as an inner journey is just holding your own feet to the fire about what you're doing and why you're doing it and who it is that you're looking to help. When you know, September 11th happened, when the tsunami happens, you know, all these things happen, the same thing happens, there's just this stampede. And it's a beautiful stampede. I love the stampede. It's beautiful because it means that people feel so intensely what's happened and they want to do something, right?
And you tell a story about the stampede around the 9/11,
yeah.
And you were on the board, I understand.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We were, so I was on the board of the September 11th Fund. That got money mostly from the telethon that was on the air a few days after. $525 million for not enough need. There was not enough need for $525 million. There were 3,000 deaths, almost not quite. There were about, I don't know, 22,000 people who lost their jobs and maybe another 20,000 residents of the area. That was it. You know, you could blanket those people, you could have them get massages every day for the rest of their lives, and you'd still have money that you were trying to figure out how to spend. And it was a dirty little secret nobody talked about, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. That nobody stopped, or nobody asked the American public or even the global public to stop and say, okay, I have compassion. I have a feeling here. And the poorest substitute for it is money, but it's the only substitute that I can deploy to make this compassion live in the world. And that is so beautiful. And people sacrifice enormously in these disaster situations to deploy their compassion in the only way possible. But if we could take it past compassion, because essentially what we're trying to do is make ourselves feel better. I mean, let's face it. My pain is in watching you suffer, and I have a great need to help you through your suffering because I'll feel better if I feel like I've helped. But if we stopped there in that moment and said, actually, I think if I really want my compassion to mean something, I want it to go where it will really matter. In the case of September 11th, we know that 5 years after September 11th, there would be firemen with PTSD beating the crap out of their wives. There would be 10 years later, first responders with mesothelioma and asthma and all kinds of breathing problems. Every disaster takes its own shape, and it takes its own shape over time, and you're not going to know what it is until it is. But because of that first stampede, then there's deafening silence over the next 5 to 10 years. There is nobody thinking about Katrina. And ask me about the earthquake in Haiti 1 year, 2 years from now.
Me.
Oh, not me. Hurricane Katrina. I guarantee you 2 years in Haiti, there will be nothing. Nothing. And Haiti was horrible before the earthquake, and it will be just as horrible when we all stampede again for the exits. So we need to be thinking in terms of, like, you know, when your beloved good friend loses somebody who loves them, everybody's going to bring a casserole in the first 3 days. But you know, the casserole probably matters most 6 weeks later, when you know what I mean? And 6 weeks later, when people have stopped calling, that's when you need to go over and have a cup of tea and talk. It's just, we need to develop a better mechanism by which we say, oh good, I feel compassion, that's great. Okay, now, let me stop there and think. I was like, God, Betty, that's really harsh. You know, I'm beginning to think it is.